What happens the moment you die? It is one of the oldest questions humans have ever asked. And somehow, after thousands of years of asking, we still do not have a clean answer. But that does not mean we have nothing to work with. Science has been quietly chipping away at this mystery for decades, and spiritual traditions from every corner of the planet have been doing the same thing for millennia. What if both of them are actually pointing toward the same strange truth? Let us start with the body, because that is where science always starts. The moment your heart stops beating, a clock begins. Not a dramatic clock, not a cosmic one, just a biological one. Your cells stop receiving oxygen, and they begin to shut down one by one. Brain activity drops, then flatlines, then goes quiet. The body starts cooling down to match the temperature of the room around it. Muscles stiffen, then eventually relax again. It sounds cold and mechanical, because biologically speaking it is. But here is where things start getting interesting. In the 1970s, a psychiatrist named Raymond Moody published a book called Life After Life. He collected the stories of over 100 people who had been clinically dead and then revived. And what they described was not nothing. They described tunnels and light and overwhelming feelings of peace. They described watching their own bodies from above, seeing doctors working on them in detail. Some described meeting relatives who had already died. These are called near-death experiences, and they are not rare. Millions of people around the world have reported them. And the details are shockingly consistent across different cultures, different religions, and different centuries. Now, scientists do not just shrug and walk away from that. Researchers at the University of Southampton ran one of the largest studies ever on near-death experiences. They found that roughly 40% of cardiac arrest survivors reported some form of awareness during the time they were clinically dead. One patient accurately described the actions of the medical team in the room while his heart had completely stopped. His brain should have had zero capacity for forming memories at that moment. And yet, there was the memory, sitting there, waiting to be reported. That is the kind of detail that keeps neuroscientists awake at night. Some scientists believe near-death experiences are just the brain misfiring, a final surge of activity, a chemical release, a hallucination produced by a dying nervous system. And honestly, that explanation does have some evidence behind it. Studies on rats showed a spike of brain activity right after cardiac arrest. Some researchers believe something similar happens in humans. The brain, they say, creates one last vivid experience before everything goes dark. It is a tidy explanation, but it does not explain why the content of those experiences is so consistent. It does not explain the verified out-of-body observations. And it definitely does not explain what happens next, which is where things get even stranger. There is a theory in quantum physics called quantum consciousness, developed by physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff. Their hypothesis, called orchestrated objective reduction, suggests that consciousness is not just produced by the brain. Instead, it argues that consciousness arises from quantum processes happening inside tiny structures within our neurons called microtubules. Now, this theory is still heavily debated, but here is the part that makes people stop and think. Quantum information, according to the rules of quantum physics, cannot simply be destroyed. It can be scattered, it can be transformed, but it does not vanish. So if consciousness is fundamentally quantum in nature, then maybe something persists after the brain stops working. Maybe it does not disappear so much as it disperses. That idea actually lines up with something ancient traditions have been saying for a very long time. In Hinduism, the concept of Atman describes an eternal self that is separate from the physical body. When the body dies, the Atman continues, eventually being reborn or merging with the universal consciousness called Brahman. The details are complex and rich, but the core idea is simple. You are not just your body. You existed before it, and you will continue after it. Buddhism approaches it differently, but arrives at a similar edge. The idea of continuity between lives, karma as a kind of persistent energy, consciousness as a flame passing from one candle to the next. The flame is not the same flame, but the light continues. Christianity, Islam, and Judaism all carry the idea of a soul that survives physical death. The language and the imagery differ dramatically across these traditions, but the underlying conviction is remarkably consistent. There is something in you that is not made of atoms, and that something does not end when your heart does. Indigenous traditions around the world share similar beliefs. The idea that ancestors remain present, that the dead are not gone but simply moved to another layer of existence. These are not primitive misunderstandings of biology. They are sophisticated frameworks built on centuries of human observation and experience. Now, one of the most provocative scientific ideas in this space comes from a concept called biocentrism. Proposed by scientist Robert Lanza, biocentrism argues that life and consciousness are not products of the universe. Instead, they are the foundation of it. The universe does not create consciousness. Consciousness creates the experience of the universe. Under this view, death is not an ending. It is more like a door between rooms in a building that has no walls. When one life ends, consciousness simply reorganizes itself into a new frame of experience. It sounds almost spiritual, and Lanza has been criticized heavily for it. But the underlying physics he draws from, particularly the role of the observer in quantum mechanics, is entirely real and entirely established. There is also the work being done with people who have had shared death experiences. These are cases where people who are perfectly healthy and very much alive report experiencing something alongside a dying person. Spouses who describe traveling partway through a tunnel alongside their partner. Hospice workers who report seeing a light leave the body at the moment of death. These cases are rarer and harder to study, but they are documented, and they are deeply strange. They suggest that whatever happens at death is not entirely private, that it has some kind of external, observable quality that others can sometimes perceive. And then there is the research on past life memories in children. Psychiatrist Ian Stevenson spent decades at the University of Virginia studying children who spontaneously described detailed memories of previous lives. He documented over 3,000 cases with specific names, locations, and circumstances that were later verified. Children who described wounds from a previous life and had birthmarks in the exact corresponding location. Children who spoke languages they had never been taught. Children who recognized family members of people they had never met in this life. This is not anecdote. It is peer-reviewed, documented research that most people simply never hear about. So what do we actually know? We know that consciousness is far more mysterious than we once assumed. We know that near-death experiences are real, consistent, and sometimes verifiable. We know that quantum physics suggests information does not simply cease to exist. We know that every major spiritual tradition in human history has independently arrived at the conclusion that something survives death. And we know that children across the world have described memories of previous lives with a level of accuracy that is very difficult to dismiss. None of this proves life after death. Science cannot prove it, at least not yet. But science can no longer comfortably dismiss it either. The honest answer is that we are standing at a boundary. On one side is everything our biology and physics can measure and test and verify. On the other side is something that seems to be real, but refuses to fit neatly into our equations. That gap, that uncertain space between the last heartbeat and whatever follows, is one of the most fascinating places in all of human knowledge. And maybe, just maybe, the fact that both science and every spiritual tradition keep arriving at the same edge of the same question is itself telling us something. Something is there, We just have not figured out the right language to describe it yet. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel.